Welcome to another episode of Off Script with Rip. I'm your host, Ryan Ripken, and this is a podcast where I bring on guests from a variety of different industries to talk about their story and journey. And regardless of what their background is or what path they chose to take, if you listen to the words, there is a lot that you can relate and resonate with. And above all, if not, there are plenty of great stories. And this week's guest is MLBPA Agent George Iskenderian. And George actually is a former roommate, teammate, and above all, he is one of my friends, and he is a great guy, a former professional player who we started together at the University of South Carolina as freshmen. We transferred together to junior college in Florida, Indian River State College. He went on to play 1 year at Miami University of Miami, and then was drafted by the Milwaukee Brewers, making it up to AA in their system. But George and I touch on our experiences, what we learned in the past, and now George is involved in representing players himself and how he can try to help get them to the next level and have them understand going through the ranks of high school to college to pro ball that there are a lot of adjustment periods. So there's a lot of great chatter in there, and we do have some good stories just from our time spent together. So before I start the interview, if you could please like and subscribe to this podcast, that would give me a lot more to work with, especially reviewing the podcast specifically would be great. I just want to make this a better experience for all of you, but enough of me rambling on. Here is this week's episode with George Iskenderian. Welcome to another episode of Off Script with Rip. I'm your host, Ryan Ripken, and this week's guest is friend, roommate, former professional baseball player, George minor league. Okay, time out. Professional baseball is professional baseball.
It is. But it's funny. I always equate, like, and you're right, it's a stepping stone, but minor league baseball essentially being semi-pro pertaining to the MLB, just because it's utilized as almost a weeding out process to get to the epitome of success. But anyways, yeah, pro baseball.
You know, we could debate about that for a while, but it's accomplishment. You played, we met each other at the University of South Carolina. That's where we both started. Went to junior college together. You went on to Miami. I went on to pro ball at the time. And then you ended up being drafted by the Brewers. Am I right so far?
So far, spot on.
Am I remembering what's happening? We'll leave out the other details for now of all that. But now you've gone to the other side of in the business world and still being involved with athletes and representation. So I'll let you kind of explain your little journey here, but that's my backstory for you. So George, take it away for a little bit.
Yeah. So obviously did a pretty good job summing it up there. Similarly to you, all boys high school for me. Don Bosco Prep, grew up in northern New Jersey, prevalent football school. Actually, I do remember, I believe it was my junior year, we played you guys. What high school was it?
Gilman School. The Gilman School.
We played at a college. It was a neutral.
At Morgan State.
That's right, Morgan State. Pretty sure we won by landslide, if I'm not mistaken.
Might have been 40.
Yeah. So I witnessed 2 national titles on the football side while I was at the school. Obviously transitioning from high school baseball to the University of South Carolina, where I was fortunate enough to meet you. It's funny. Out of curiosity, I was looking up the cost of Chipotle stock. Back when we were in college. It was at right around 600 and change. And I thought to myself, if we had invested the money that we spent at Chipotle in stock, we'd be well off right now.
Oh, we would. We can get into that about the Chipotle, by the way. We went to one Chipotle 20 to 25 minutes away at least 6-7 times a week.
Right. In minimum.
All right, we can go back to that, but continue
on. So obviously transitioning from high school baseball in the Northeast New Jersey in particular to South Carolina, which at the time was coming off back-to-back titles, had just lost the year before we got there to Arizona in the finals. Big jump, right? Just big jump, big talent gap. Actually, I recall in the fall, you and I both struggling immensely even at times questioning whether or not I was cut out for that level of baseball. Just serious struggles where you're so used to in high school, this. If we don't get 2 hits a game, it's considered a bad game. I'm going home displeased. And then transitioning over to college baseball, if you scrap out a 1 for 4, it's actually not all that bad. I remember striking out 9 times in a row at one point. It was the first time I'd ever seen a slider in my life, a plus slider at that, and just questioning whether or not I was cut out for that level. Probably putting a lot of pressure on myself internally, just given the expectations I had for myself. I know you were similar in that sense. Sometimes being perfectionist in this game hurts more than helps. It's not possible by any means, but in our own brains, obviously we strive for perfection, and you have to learn how to manage that through time, which obviously more and more you endure failure, I think organically that process starts to iron itself out. But I'm glad it happened. It taught me a lot. Obviously, taking a step back, we transitioned into Fort Pierce, Florida, Indian River State College. Personally, for me, I tell everybody this, Ryan, you'd probably agree. I think for my playing career, best thing that ever happened to me. Best thing that ever happened to me. Reason being, I think, obviously, now you start to take out all the outside expectations of winning, right? Which obviously is primary focus at a college program. Any college program, the focus is on getting to Omaha and potentially winning a College World Series. Mm-hmm. Junior college baseball taught me how to love playing the game again and competing. It's just you, backfield, grandma, grandpa in the stands. There's not much else outside that. Some scouts and college recruiters from time to time. But again, I remember you and I swinging wood bats in that league, which obviously probably expedited the learning curve from JUCO ball to pro ball for you. And, eventually when I transitioned to professional baseball after Miami, for me, having swung wood in the past, that was great for us. It was. But again, just learning how to embrace competing. Obviously, you and I went separate paths after JUCO. I was drafted in the 34th round by the Cardinals, committed to my dream school in Miami. Easy decision for me personally. Then I go back to college baseball at 20 years old at the Division I level, a lot more mentally mature, having endured failure, having a better understanding of what it entails to have success at that level, both mentally and physically in terms of preparation. Have a good year in terms of performance, end up getting to the College World Series that year, getting smoked by Florida twice. Their roster was loaded.
Nasty.
So Harrison Bader, Pete Alonso, Logan Short, AJ Puck, Alex Faedo, Dane Dunning, Buddy Reed, Richie Martin, JJ Schwartz, who had the monster freshman year. Mm-hmm. They were loaded. So we lose to them game 1 by probably a touchdown plus, maybe a touchdown and a field goal. Walk off Arkansas game 2. And then Florida smokes us game 3. And then it's transitioning to pro ball, drafted in the 7th round by the Brewers. My first living experience, professional baseball, I'm not quite sure about you, was unfinished basement in Helena, Montana, Pioneer League. Took about 2 or 3 steps back in terms of the day-to-day lifestyle from college baseball. Everybody, I tell every young kid this now. I think a lot of people are infatuated with the thought of professional baseball, and then you go through the rigors and the realities of what it entails day to day. Eye-opening for me, obviously, a variety of different cultures in the locker room, language barriers from time to time. But again, I couldn't imagine having signed at 18. Even at 21, it was a big adjustment for me. But, after rookie ball, long story short, get up to AA. I get put on the Phantom IL. I'm struggling immensely, playing once every 3 to 4 days, striking out every other at bat. Not necessarily a recipe for success in professional baseball. So they're going to send me either low A or extended. I end up abruptly packing my things, driving home, going back to school, getting my econ degree at Miami, taking a position at Morgan Stanley in wealth management. And wasn't my passion, wasn't my calling. I remember getting my Series 7 and 66, coming up on production month 0, staring at myself in the dual monitor screen saying, this isn't
not for you.
Not for me. And then I transitioned into player rep, and here I am today. So that's
before, because you know what, I think it's how I envision this kind of going. We're going to get into the player rep later now because I think it's cool. But I'm glad you could paint the picture. And I mean, I know this, but it's great for you to just explain it. First off, I want to go back to South Carolina for a second. Just for people to know, like George and I we're great now. We did not like each other the first. We did not like each other. And maybe this is a good story for people of don't judge books by their cover or like give it time. It's not going to be perfect. So George and I, what?
Or the teams they root for.
And probably that's what we had to do. I mean, we had different sports teams we liked. We were very strong in our opinions. Yeah. And from that, even to playing video games when we got a little bit, that's kind of where we might have bonded a little bit more on some other cases. Woke up our entire dorm essentially.
NHL,
screaming playing NHL because I was getting smacked. No, but so the point right there is that it's not always how it goes, but it's very interesting because I think as we went through this whole process, that there's a perception of college sports. There's this glory to getting from high school to college. You feel wanted, you feel excited, and you go to a big school. And again, there's nothing wrong. Like if you're ready and you're capable of playing at a big school, I have nothing against that. But there's definitely a perception that's being overlooked of development, depending on where you go, might not always be at the forefront. And I think that's what we're kind of talking about with JUCO. Because South Carolina, I don't even remember how many guys were there in the fall. 48?
Right.
50?
Yeah, somewhere around there.
Yeah. And you're trying to vie for the spot. And I don't blame looking back at the process for the coaches, but those big schools, their primary objective is they need to win ball games first. Then the next thing is if the players do well and you get drafted, it's great, but that's not necessarily the ultimate goal of the team. Was that fair to say as far as for personal development? Everyone's different, but that's just how I felt, where it was a lot of guys and there's only so much you could do for every single player.
Right. Yeah. And I'll say this, I think college baseball is the best thing that happened to me at the end of the day, but in terms of development, it's also contingent upon your skill sets. Mm-hmm. To me, if you're a present performer that has the ability to obviously control the zone, make consistent bat to ball from the offensive side of the ball, make plays consistently, you have the opportunity to probably make an impact a little bit sooner at the college level. Players like you and I who are going to endure some more growing pains, maybe had some more raw ability. The college coaches don't have the time to go through those growing pains at the jeopardy of winning games, right? And rightfully so. Jobs are on the line.
Right.
Have shorter term deals year to year, whatever it may be. Their primary objective is to win. And if players develop along the way, that's great. But it's not going to be our primary focus, right? And you see it time and time again. A lot of the guys that end up getting drafted really well out of the collegiate level weren't the blue chip prospects in high school. They were guys with moderate tools on the front end, raw tools, that is, that could piece together extended sample sizes of consistency, end up playing well over a 3-year period of time and making a lot of money after, whether they're sophomore eligible or junior, 2 or 3 years, depending on the age. But definitely for you and I in particular, and a lot of players that have raw, unrefined skill sets, they're going to miss out on playing time, especially at these high-level competitive schools that, have a standard and an expectation from the fan base to win. I agree completely.
Yeah, I ran into one of our teammates was Max Schrock.
Yeah,
and Schrock came in and was ready. Like the dude was hitting from the get-go.
Yep.
But we crossed paths again with the Nationals organization, and he was saying, he was ready to, paraphrasing, but he was ready to play in college, so therefore he could go out there, and they love that. Well, He felt like he had to take a different step of developing, and it was something that he wasn't exposed to because in South Carolina it was, hey, you're doing great already, keep doing what you're doing.
Right.
And that was it. And we even saw too. I mean, it's not like all these staffs have. I know it's getting better, but even when we were there, there was only X amount of like I felt there was. I remember Brian Busher was the coach, but he was like the volunteer coach at the time. It's very understaffed still for the amount of kids that you're trying to work on and develop.
Right.
And there's a little bit more restrictions for time and all that stuff. But
Sure.
You're right. I can't tell you how many guys that I know that went to the smaller schools,
right,
and didn't hear of them. They figured it out. It's not a coincidence,
right,
that guys go somewhere else, go to small schools, they develop, figure out what works for them, and then their skill set catches up with their like getting that experience.
right.
So yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I did say like I did enjoy certain things at South Carolina. I learned also really how magical Pepto-Bismol can be. So people that don't know too, that's all I drink. That's all I use now for my issues.
Well, you tried swaying me into Tums, but you and I both know we're both hard-headed, and that's probably a lot of our reasons for butting heads early on. The Tums Pepto debate, right? Rub me the wrong way.
I never knew someone that anything that was going wrong, stress, headache, indigestion, tired, whatever, this dude just walks out with the cherry Pepto bottle and just slugging it. A bottle a day. I think that was like your thing, like, yeah, just this cures everything. And I'm like, this dude's insane. This dude's insane. He's Jersey through and through right now, and I can't get a read on him. But I will say that's Pepto saved me more times than I can even count now.
It's funny. I feel like I took Pepto quite religiously in college, but as you live in all these unique areas, your stomach becomes immune to all these unique cuisines and delicacies. I don't need it anymore. Playing in the minor leagues, going to junior college, obviously traveling the country, playing college baseball, you have so many different meals that your stomach just becomes immune to things that other people find nauseating. It's fascinating.
Oh yeah. Let's talk JUCO for a second though, because we both went to Indian River State College, go Pios, the Pioneers. Very foreign for us as far as you go from South Carolina. We both go from South Carolina that has everything to a school that they had dorms, but it was mainly a community college.
Right.
So, facilities, we had the cages behind the giant, the right field wall. And we had 3 coaches, right?
Mitch Markham,
Eastham. Yep.
And pitching coach. Named huge Alabama football fan.
Huge. Love having the chat. So it's going to come back to me there. But anyway, it was them devoting their time to do that, but I'll tell you what, the relaxation, I felt like that was a great reset, even though it was different to your point. To kind of find out, like we had the ability, we knew we were going to go play every day, and we could work on whatever we wanted to work on.
Almost had to desensitize ourselves from the stress we would put on each other at South Carolina, because now you're not having to look over your shoulder every at bat saying, hey, if I don't get a hit here, am I going to be in the lineup the next day, or even the next at bat for that matter? Mm-hmm. And it's not a knock towards South Carolina. It's just college baseball as a whole.
Yes.
It's produce or obviously wait your turn, which you don't know when that turn's going to come again, if at all. But I completely agree with you. Mitch Markham for us was a blessing. Having him invest in us personally and as players, telling us essentially even prior to the start of the season, like, you guys are my guys. Yeah. You're going to go out there every single day. And trust me, there were a large amounts of mistakes, a lot of which you saved over at first base, given your defensive ability. I stretched out every piece of that 6'6" frame with some of my throws over to first. But it was really, really mentally comforting to know that we had somebody that was going to stick with us through thick and thin, regardless of performance, and the mistakes that were obviously inevitable that this game brings. And yeah, just having to almost desensitize myself from, hey, perform now, perform today, to make sure that there's lineup stability. Yeah, it was the best thing for us. There's no doubt about it.
I agree, because especially, and I still had this issue, and maybe it was even, we both would ruminate. I think that was the other thing, was we maybe bonded over how much we would just find ourselves just talking about like the what ifs, or like just going down this really large rabbit hole of stuff. And I remember my mom would be like, why do you guys do this every time? We're like, I don't, it's therapeutic, but it's not, I don't know. But you're right. It was, but the power of someone as a coach, and that was a simple thing of Markham just saying, hey, hey, you're my guys. I believe in you. You're going to go out there. You mess up. So what? And I still feel bad in the sense, because both of us still were thinking about the next step, and in some ways I wish that if I could have gone back and be like, hey, let me just really stay in this moment more, because I think I would have enjoyed it even more so. Right. But that's a reflection point. So maybe for other people hearing that, enjoy. I say it a lot now, like try to be present with what you're doing, because the moment's going to pass and you're going to look back and wish that you had maybe done it differently. Because I just remember I stressed so much about the draft, and I'm thinking back, like, why did I do that?
Right.
Why did I do that? I put so much more pressure on it, and I already had someone that believed in me. Like, why don't just stick with what you have? You have people that believe in you. You're going to go out there and you're going to have fun playing with. We had, had a good group of guys. We had fun. Things were laid back, and I guess sometimes we take that for granted, or I did at least.
No.
So, but yeah, we did our thing. You crushed it. I mean, I know you're modest, but didn't you win the ACC batting title the next year?
You know what's interesting? I sort of wish that there was some sort of hardware for it, because now it's like, God willing, if I have kids one day, they're gonna be like, well, where's the award, right? But yeah, I did. I was fortunate enough to. I also hit in front of Zach Collins, who was the 10th overall pick the year after I was drafted in 2016. So I got a lot of fastballs to hit. A ton.
So that's the only reason. That's the only reason you led the ACC in hitting. That's it.
And the 5-6 hole, right? A lot of rollover ground balls between shortstop and third. Had they implemented data and analytics a little bit earlier, they pushed the third baseman over into the 6 hole. Maybe put the shortstop right over second base. Second baseman could probably play like short left field. Obviously, there's shift regulations now, but I'd have hit 0.
No one I could remember till this day knew how to, on any breaking ball, put it right where no one's gonna get it every single time for a hit.
Yeah.
It was truly an art. I think the one thing I say both of us would get frustrated with is because you had ridiculous juice and power, and I felt like I could tap into mine, but we had the hardest time trying to put that into a game. And
that's why I'm on this podcast. I could have figured it out.
Dude, I hit in Double-A. I hit a home run off of Greg Holland in the playoffs. Probably the furthest ball I hit since like the one home run I hit at JUCO at the Yankees complex.
Oh yeah.
And I was just, and those both those moments at separate times, like years apart. I'm like, why? Like that I launched that. Why can't this happen more?
Like, right.
What's stopping it?
And it's just so frustrating knowing that it's in there. But even when we did tap into the power, which was rare for me and you at times, right? I didn't know how I got to that point in game. In BP, we could do it on demand. We really could. I mean, you and I would be, home run derby contestants potentially if we wanted to. But you transition to a game, and me personally, I think for you and I, honestly, Ryan, I really do. I think it was mental. I think it was.
It was 1,000% mental.
We just couldn't free up our minds to say, hey, there's really no difference in the swing I'm about to take from batting practice to game situation. It was just mentally locking ourselves up, which obviously the body's going to follow the mind, and putting ourselves under stress. Our swings would get long. We'd overthink mechanics. And I was constantly top spinning balls in game. Constantly. And I personally think for me it was a mental block. I really do. Maybe you would agree.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think it's funny in that sense where I look back and we want it. And the last thing people say is power is the last thing that comes as a hitter, right? It's the last thing that makes the jump. But I think because of that expectations and the mental and me used to get so frustrated so quickly that it wasn't happening and it kept not happening. And this was a prime example. I remember and so stressed about the draft. And I remember both of us going into the JUCO year. We're getting a lot of traction for the draft. Both thought we'd go in the top 10 rounds. And I remember I was so fixated on like, well, I know I can do this. But then as the games went on and I felt like I had to do more, why am I not doing that? And instead of trying to work on it and try to correct more organically and really like go into the cage now and that's what I try to if I work with anybody or tell anybody, like let's actually be okay with failing here and let's just work through it, not get so discouraged. But I remember after everything was all said and done, it was like one of our last 2 games of the season at Indian River. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. Like, gonna relax. I went like 4 for 5 at Brevard. And I was hitting balls left and right, and I was like driving them. I think I had 3 doubles that game, and I'm like, what the actual I'll blank it out, but what the actual like I'm just sitting there and but that just goes to show you I wasn't thinking about what I was doing, and I naturally allowed myself to go out there and perform and get out of my head.
Right.
And I think that's the big thing. And we've seen it. How many guys have we seen physically super talented that don't make it to the bigs
all the time?
I remember there were some guys that you'd even tell me that you'd say physically, Ryan, I've never seen some guys do something that what they can, throwing, hitting, but it's here.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, a lot of times, especially on the front end in high school, those are the guys that are securing premium investment. And then through time, they have the inability to put it all together. And like you said, it's mental, really. It comes down to convictions, confidence, whatever it may be, and ability. They just never can quite figure it out mentally. And then you have the guy with not even half the raw skill set that some of these first rounders may have, but the ability to apply it consistently day in and day out, and they end up having far more sustainable careers. But again, like I said, I think for you and I, obviously it was the perfectionist mentality, right? Overanalyzing everything, not just baseball, but everything in life, right?
Everything.
It's funny. One of my favorite moments that we ever had, you and I had it, and you'll remember this. We were coming up on a statistics final, and you went missing. you went missing, and I'm sitting there trying to figure out these statistics formulas without you, who was pretty much the guy that taught me everything in math. And PGA Village is where we lived at the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
I remember driving around town trying to find you. We couldn't find you. It was a bad game because, like you said, we were worried about the draft and probably thought, okay, one bad performance. There's people in the stands analyzing me, piecing together these scouting reports. Like it's over. To us, the world was crumbling, and I remember, I don't know what time you got back that night.
Oh yeah, I remember because I'm pretty sure my mom was even giving you a call. I just wasn't answering anyone. I was so.
And I think what happened was when we found you, you were looking at your reflection in a pond. Yeah. Just asking yourself, what is wrong with my swing?
Yeah. Well, so you know what? It's funny hearing your perspective. We can laugh about it now, but man,
it's a scary place to be in.
Talk about a dark moment, but that's the reality, right? Like that's the type of shit where we look back and that's the amount of pressure. What being in your head and being so hard on yourself, the perfectionist. Yeah. That's what that looked like. And I got to a point I didn't know how to handle myself we'll get that time. We were 19, 20.
Yep.
And I felt like baseball was defining who I was as a person, because that was the next step I was trying to take. So when you didn't play well, I took it very personally. Like it tore me up.
Right.
And And I know it did for you, but you handled it a little bit better than I did in that
Yeah.
case.
Which still wasn't great. Wasn't great.
But like, it's interesting for us to look back. I tell people, as we can talk about pro ball next though, but I tell people, for me, the time when I finally started to let things go of being the expectations, being a Ripken, feeling like it's not gonna, I just need to let the chips fall where they may,
Right.
continue to put the work in. Cause that was the thing for us. Like we put the work in.
Yep.
Like we weren't guys that were slacking. We
Right.
didn't, it wasn't that we were ever unprepared, ever. It just was mentally, we were so fixated on being perfect that it just messed with us.
Yep.
When I got released by the Nationals, and
Mhm.
at that moment, I'm like, my career could be over.
Right.
And I sat there and I'm going, is this how I wanted my baseball career to then be defined? And when I looked back, and I was disappointed in myself, for not because I had my struggles as a player. I was disappointed because I let how I let myself get so dark in this moment, and I didn't appreciate more of the time. So I told myself after I got released, if I get another shot to play, I am just going to embrace and enjoy the moment. Now, I will say though, and maybe this is a whole other topic, I feel like for you, and for people that don't understand, because we'll move into pro ball, the grind of minor league baseball, not even minor league baseball, the grind of baseball in general, I think is it's very underestimated. I don't think people understand what it entails
Right.
fully, right? And I know that messed with your mind a lot, right?
Oh yeah.
So
Oh yeah. Again, like I touched on earlier, there's the perception and the thought process and the infatuation in professional baseball, and then there's the reality of the day to day. And you really don't know till you get there, right? When you're looking at this decision, and it's hard. Imagine for you, you were a draft prospect in high school. I really wasn't on that level, but looking through, and you had an obviously a different outlook on all this because you had been through it all up at the highest level and seen it from a young age. But a lot of the other kids, you're making this decision blindly, and then some of these guys get there and say, "What did I sign up for?" Right? It has nothing to do with what I thought the reality of this may have been, and that's scary. It is scary, and I almost wish that there was a time period, like a two week to 1 month time frame, in which the player has the ability to analyze signing at a high school, and at that point, if he doesn't necessarily think this is the path that he wanted to take, he can give back the bonus to the organization. They can spend it elsewhere. It'll never happen, I would assume, but it's just really hard to make a decision where you know nearly nothing about. And you and I can sit here all day long and walk a young kid through what the realities are like, but until he goes through it, he's never going to understand.
no. And that's your point. I mean, even though I saw it from the lens, but I didn't see it from that grind of it. I saw the end of it where my dad was one of had already had this illustrious career.
Right.
My whole lifetime he was in the big leagues. Didn't even talk about it. He spent almost 4 years in the minors, but I wasn't around for then. So how would I know? And to your point, when you get into it, is really when you start to figure it out. And I didn't even, as much as I've been around a baseball family, I still didn't understand it till I was there. And I think
Right.
another part that kind of, I think when we're younger too, and everyone has different paths of their lives, right? But let's just say the typical for where we went to school and high school and being around, what people did is after high school, it's either if you went into the workplace and you started your own career and didn't go to college, that's one way, or people went to college, you lived it up, you partied, you did whatnot, and then you were going to start your career. So you already knew what the path there, even though you'd have to walk that walk and see what that's like. But that's the majority of the population doing that. It's hard to talk with other people and go, give me the rundown exactly, and also to be able to relate to it. And you can go through it. I think the other part I guess I'm trying to get at is you could go through those other stages with a lot of your other friends. So
Right.
if we did those other paths, even if we had struggles, your friends are going through that as well. You're going into
Right.
pro ball and you don't have that other person necessarily to walk with. And usually when you'll meet people in pro ball, and that's where you kind of bond, obviously, but going into it, no one's really helping you through that process.
No. And I tell everybody, pro ball is the closest thing from a professional sports perspective, baseball in particular, to survival of the fittest. It's a giant weeding out process in the minor leagues. And I think it's really hard because at that point, when you're 20, 21 years old, transitioning, barring that you went to college before signing, your friends are pretty much in place at that point for the most part. I think rarely, obviously you'll run into somebody that you have a great rapport with, but at that point, everybody's scratching and clawing, trying to get to the big league level, right? And you know that you're going to leave a lot of your friends behind, or vice versa, depending on whether or not they get called up, you stay behind, or on the contrary, or somebody gets released and sent home that you were really close with. It's hard. And after college baseball, really, you don't have the ability to choose who you surround yourself with on a day-to-day basis. And you are living, breathing with these guys. I mean, all day long. You're in a locker room, this 7 p.m. game. You're getting there at 11 a.m. You're there all day with these guys, all day. So even if you don't necessarily have the rapport, you have to play along. You have to get along. It's certainly not easy.
It's one of the most dynamic. It's one of the most intriguing environments when you think of it this way. If you go from the start of spring training in February and the season ends in October, that's 8 months, right? My math's right there. 8 months. So 8 months out of the year, you are with this group, this organization of people. And then all of a sudden when it ends, hey, for the 4 months, you're going back then to your family, your friends you grew up with, or whatever it may be, and you're living two separate lives. Like legit living two separate lives with two different people. It's like your family, like you develop a family in the baseball world, but to your point, you can get close with guys, and then guess what? Things change week by week, month by month, and it's not a when you go home the 4 months, at least you have a little bit more of what can be more permanent. You kind of understand what that is.
Yep.
The 8 months with those guys, you could spend time with them, but in an instant, it's over, or the circumstances have changed.
It's funny. I think one of the sayings is like, you never know when your last game is. Truly, in my career, I know this sounds sad, I couldn't tell anybody the last game I played because I was on that Phantom for quite some time, and I made the decision to drive home. It can end so abruptly in professional baseball. You really understand when it's all said and done how small your window really is. And when there's people sitting there telling you like, hey, you have a small opportunity to maximize your abilities in this game, it's true. But it goes to show how quickly it can end. Friendship in the locker room, whatever it may be. It's quite eye-opening.
I'm going to explain Phantom real quickly for people that don't know this. So being put on the Phantom or Phantom roster is when, so say whatever level you're at, if it's A ball, double A, triple A, and they don't have an active spot for you to be on the roster, but they don't want to send you down a level. They don't want to, whatever. They'll just take you off the roster and put you on either the Phantom injured list, where you're just going to be sitting. So if they put you on a 10-day injured list, or what it used to be when there used to be short season and the seasons didn't start yet, they would just move a player from, double A or from the full season teams to that short season team because it's not active.
Right.
So meaning everyone just thinks, so that player just got sent back to Florida, but really, like for you, and I was on the Phantom too in Hagerstown in Low A. When we were on the Phantom, we just sat there. We went through every practice there, but you knew you were not going to play.
Right.
And so to give people context, like that's tough.
Essentially, what the organization is telling you at that point is you're not good enough right now. Would you agree with that? In short,
oh yeah. And do you want to talk about messing with you mentally?
Those were dark days. It was, and I had all that period of time. Honestly, Ryan, I mean this. I fell out of love with playing the game. This is sad to say. My senior year of high school,
Yeah.
really.
Well,
When I
I
started
remember.
to realize like what the business really is, what it entails. I was a very aware kid, very analytical. I was always infatuated by the business of baseball, but I fell out of love with playing the game, both because of my inability to obviously free myself up mentally, and then the awareness of the business side. My senior year of high school. So I told myself, as soon as my career hits a regression period, obviously I always wanted to play professional baseball, but I wanted to be as realistic as I possibly could. As soon as I hit that phantom, I started to think to myself, much like you told me after you were releasing, is this it? Is this it for me? Even before I drove home,
Yeah.
knowing that, okay, I'm 20 some odd years old. I want to say I was 24, 25 years old at the time.
Mhm.
Um, is this over? And if so, what's my next step? And that struck a lot of fear initially in me. But I knew as soon as I was going to be sent down to either extended spring training or low A Wisconsin, which would have been 2 levels lower, for me, the writing was on the wall. And not only because of what the organization had the right to do, but more so what I was experiencing internally in my own head with what my next step in life was. But a lot of that had to do with the stresses I put on myself. And like you said a little while ago, looking back on it, I look at all that stress and I ask myself, was there any upside to it? It never led to better performance, right? Never, not a day in my career. It never shortened the day. It only made things tougher
Mhm.
and not admirable at all. Like I remember showing up to the park every single day in high A in the Florida State League at one point, which, you were in spring training in Melbourne.
Yep.
You
Melbourne, Florida, baby.
and just saying like, I don't know that this is what I want to do every
Yep.
day. And it's funny because I even thought about it on the biggest stage at the big league level. I asked myself, and I came to the conclusion like, this isn't what I want to do every day. I don't want to come to a locker room and play every day and be separated from stability and doing the things I want to do and creating my own schedule. It just wasn't appealing to me anymore. And I couldn't come to that realization until I went through it. But even at the highest level, if I were to get to the big leagues, I know in my heart, and it's why I knew I was comfortable enough walking away, that it's not what I wanted.
Yep.
It's not what I wanted.
No. Well, and then I think it's maybe a good transition into what you're doing now because
Yeah,
you wanted to stay involved in the game. You wanted to help the next generations. Now it's more of a representation base, but for you and knowing you because of hearing the words, how can you help best prepare these next players that have the aspirations to play professionally? So talk a little bit about what you do now
sure.
in regards to in the baseball world.
Right. So obviously, I'm in player representation as an MLBPA certified agent, and it's a really broad based day to day. It really depends on the day and the player in particular that you're handling. But again, I think one of my favorite parts about the job, ultimately, you are a business manager, right? The meat and potatoes of this business is to maximize a player's investment. But at the front end, when you're dealing with players in the draft at the high school level in particular, educating them on the realities of both playing college baseball, junior college baseball for us, obviously prior to the transfer portal, transitioning in the pro ball, empathizing as much as they can, giving them a sense of foreshadowing on what's to come is one of my favorite parts about the job. But it's just giving these families as much information as possible to help them make wise decisions, because the reality of it is, if you do decide to sign that dotted line, and the definition of life-changing money is volatile based on a family's financial situation, right? So it's hard
Mhm.
to have one standard and say, hey, this is the dollar amount it's going to take for you to either go and play collegiate baseball or sign the contract for your first minor league UPC and take your shot at the big leagues at high school. Obviously, it's dependent upon the family, but just giving them all the information prior to that point is my true passion at my core. Helping these young kids understand what they're potentially getting into if they do decide to take that step and pass on college baseball and sign professionally. And you try your best to eliminate emotions, but you get tied to these kids emotionally. You care about them. They're like little brothers.
Yeah.
Still young enough to say that, which is kind of cool. I know one day I'll have the gray hair and probably call them like the sons, extended sons, right? But truly, you you know what's in store for them before they do, and you try your best, which doesn't always work out, but you try your best to fill them in on the information that is to come. And when they do get to that point, it's really cool. Now, I've probably been in this for 4 years, seeing players transition from high school baseball to pro ball, giving them all the insight on what they could potentially face, and them having to walk through that, and then having conversations over the phone or in person, and then saying, "You prepped me for this. Like, you said this was going to come." That, to me, I love about my job. I really do.
That's the rewarding part of it, right? And again, like, yes, it's your livelihood too. So I mean, it's your job, but your intentions first and foremost. They say you do something because you're passionate about trying to make a difference, or providing something that can be helpful to others. You
Right.
know, it's even for me now. Like, I'm doing the whole media stuff, and I'm doing some lessons and whatnot. But my biggest intention when I would do my things is, how can you help? If this can either resonate with somebody or people enjoy what you're doing, then that makes you feel better. For you, you feel like you're helping the next generation of kids prepare them for chasing their dreams.
That's right.
Essentially, that's what you're doing. And
Yep.
so what's one thing, I'm just curious, what is, if you were to tell, and it could be a list of things, but if
Right.
you were to tell parents or kids in this stage, like, what's one thing that you think that needs to be addressed, or something that you see needs to be debunked? Like, I don't know if you have something off the top of your head that you've noticed over time, because let's just face it, there's a lot of expectations that are put on the kids themselves for personally that
Yep.
they do, and a lot from parents.
Right.
I mean, so what's your take? Yeah, I mean,
Well, it's interesting seeing it from the outside looking in now. You can analyze how much pressure, and sometimes the parents don't realize this, how much pressure the parents are putting on the kid to succeed. And you try your best to navigate through that for the kid. And it gets to the point at times, and it's sad, that the kid will confide in me more than he does my mom and dad. Because I think we're coming from a perspective where we've been through it, and the kid senses that. Like, this guy that's giving me this advice has been through this before. He understands that this game, like you said, doesn't define me. Whether I get to the big leagues and become the Hall of Famer, I end up with a speech in Cooperstown, or end up never getting drafted, this game should not define me. Shouldn't. First of all, it's too hard. There's way too much failure that this game entails. It's inevitable, particularly as a hitter. But I just think that's one of the things, is just allowing your kid to go through this process and enjoy the game. Play it as a game, right? Which obviously turns into a business. But as soon as the player starts to become aware at age 15, 16, 17 that it's a business, it's sad. And it can affect performance, and I think mental health too. That needs to be debunked, because there's just too many outlets to, how do I say this? To outreach. These kids are getting attention from Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, whatever it may be. They are made aware of this in their little baseball niche. They're these little amateur superstars, right? And they start to feel that pressure at a much younger age now because of social media. So that to me needs to be contained on some level. I don't know how you do it, but these kids have access to a lot of attention way earlier on than we ever did. And it's tough.
Yeah, but again, to your point, as great as technology is, 'cause it gets people gives them more reach, gives them a chance to even expand, keep in touch with people. Even in some cases, it's express yourself. But on the flip side, with all of that is going to come more pressure, even added stress. In some cases, it's not so, like, I just got on Twitter in the past year, and holy shirts and pants. Can that get toxic? Absolutely.
Right.
And just like that, because you're going to run into situations that are going to be out of your control. And when you're young and you don't understand that, why is someone making these comments, or if they're negative or there's doubts, that was something I couldn't deal with as a teenage kid. And
Right.
it's not even because I try to stay off social media. It's just because I didn't know how to compartmentalize that yet.
Right.
Right. And now you're asking kids, to your point, handle all this, and it's magnified. And so I wanted you to bring that up because I mean that is a point. I will say with the parents love their kids. They want the best. I do believe that for the majority of everyone, they either want to see their kid, if it's their dream, live it. But you're right. There sometimes can be a line where there's only so much that you can actually provide. And in some cases it can come off as, hey, you're willing to do everything. You're taking them to all these tournaments. But the way it's coming off to other people that are involved is, hey, let's take a step back here.
Right.
Let's take your intentions are good.
Right.
They are good. But look at everything you're doing or talking, or even you're proud of your kid and you're telling him, oh, he's great. He had this game. He had it. It gets natural.
Right. But like there's a fine line.
But that adds to it.
It does. And there's a fine line between supporting your kid, being the supportive mom and dad, and then living vicariously and adding pressure. And I think through time, like natural progression, you understand what your son is receptive to and what may rub him the wrong way and where you need to back off. And it takes time. It really does, because I don't have a kid just yet, so I can't relate. But I'm sure if it was my blood, I'd want to do everything in my power to make sure my son is put in the best situation to succeed. So it's hard to say.
Yeah.
But again, you and I know as players, kind of the role that we wanted mom and dad to take. But they see their little boy, and rightfully so. That's why we love them. But touching back on social media too, I think the other scary part about it is when you inflate somebody at that level at such a young age, right? And they have an ample amount of success. Mm-hmm. Failure is coming. Now my fear is when you've been told how great you are from age 14 to 18, then you transition over into either professional baseball or college ball and struggle. How are you going to respond?
Yeah.
How are you going to respond when you are just another, let's call it what it is, like a cog in the wheel, right? Another cog in the wheel, either at a collegiate program or minor league baseball, because now you're valued based on your stat line, right? You're valued based on performance and the production that you can produce between the lines. And there's a lot of other guys like you, if not better. And you and I both know that it comes down to consistency at that point. So although you may be the most talented in your small niche in high school or even college, now when you're competing against the best in the world, failure is going to come. And my fear is, how do you respond?
I love that, actually, because you're right. And even I wasn't even with the social media aspect for me, but growing up, I felt, like I'm going to play baseball. I'm going to get drafted. I come from a baseball family. It's going to happen. And then when I got to South Carolina, like I wasn't ready in the development process yet. I was still raw, but boy, was it a wake up call. Was it humbling? That I was like, man, there is players just as good, if not better than you from here on out for the rest of the way. And pro ball, like we talked about it, there are, when people say with the big leagues, this is the only thing I get when I get irritated with guys being like, oh, well, like you didn't have enough to make it, and well, there's so many things layered to that. It's not because of just talent, because when you're looking at the bigs, like, oh, did you see anybody that threw that hard, or was that disgusting? I said, I've seen guys that are even probably more disgusting than guys that are in the big leagues. The guys who made it to the big leagues knew how to really make themselves the best version of themselves, essentially, to get there and push their ways to it. But I know guys that I was like, I don't want to face that guy because that guy's gross. But the problem with him was he couldn't consistently put it together, and he burned out, or that was it. So to your point, when you keep moving through, you're going to be humbled. Failure is inevitable. It's going to happen. And in baseball, it's going to happen more than anything else. I mean, I tell people all the time, in what profession are you going to fail 70% of the time and be one of the best hitters ever to play the game? And that's the level of it, of success that you're allowed to have, but it shows you how hard it is. And when you're a young kid, though, and you're moving on, and you even said in high school, if you didn't hit 400, you felt like you weren't doing enough. If you weren't getting hits every game, and it's a mass, it's not that kids can't handle it. It's not that your talent, but for some, it can be a massive jump. And we're not talking about the Jackson Holidays, the number one overall picks. We're talking about the majority of high school kids that if they sign, there is a big gap. There's a big learning curve. Right? Is that fair to say?
Oh, there's no question about it. And it's for them, they don't have the opportunity to have that mental and physical maturation at the college level where you have that time period to say, okay, failure is going to happen. They're jumping right into professional baseball where it's their job. You can't escape it. Whether or not you're in a slump, those things snowball quite quickly, right? 4 at-bats turn into 30, a bad stretch of 30 consistent at-bats, right? You've never been 0 for 30 in your life. As a high school player, as a matter of fact, in the instant you ever thought about 0 for 30, you say, that's never going to be me.
Ever.
It could come quickly.
Oh, it's coming.
It's coming quickly. And it's just really, really scary for me. Even at the highest level, very seldomly do you see somebody have this smooth transition over from the high school level to either college or professionally. There are going to be learning curves and moments of failure. But like you said, there are so many times in professional baseball, even collegiately, where you'll walk back from home plate and be like, that is one of the best pitchers I've seen. How does he have a 5.5 ERA? Right? Because the stuff's there, but he just has the inability to apply it consistently. Maybe he can't command it, whatever it may be, but he has some sort of Achilles heel that's holding him back from being that elite level prospect or productive major leaguer. It's crazy, man. And I think, like you and I have said, sometimes it could be mechanical, but a lot of times it really is mental.
Yeah, I remember for me, I hit in short season, came to the Orioles, and yes, I was older for short season. I was trying to reinvent my swing. I felt terrible, awful. Tim Raines Jr. was my hitting coach, and he said, "We're not going to worry about your swing at all. I always want you to mentally have a game plan, and we're going to stick to it each time. And if you're right with your plan, but you get out, good, that's fine." So I said, "All right," and then that eliminated extra thought. And I ended up hitting like 287 or 280, whatever it was. And I went like, dude, that's ridiculous. And that in itself changed. So then in 2019, when I had really felt like I was putting everything together and I got hurt with my oblique, I had the game plan and my skills caught up. The mental part to me is way more important than the physical part. Because physically, if you have some skills, you're going to keep growing. But if you mentally never get there, unless like you're one of those ridiculously talented dudes where it's sometimes it's good to be, I don't want to say you're not thinking as much or be a little bit dumber.
Sure.
But that's the thing is you have to be willing to brush off when things go wrong too. Yep. So you got to be able to mentally be either brush things off or mentally be prepared to fix your mistakes constantly.
Right. It's a constant battle. It's a constant battle day to day.
Day to day. God, you ain't lying. And I'm still facing it's a constant battle right now for me day to day, trying to figure out how to do these videos, how to do this podcast.
No doubt. But you've had this personality since, I've known you. So when you transitioned into this, actually last time, when I was just out in Aberdeen, Annapolis.
Yeah.
Way. Good recommendation by you. What was it called? What was the name of the restaurant? Flamont. Fantastic.
Good.
I actually ended up texting your mom saying, I think Ryan found his sweet spot, meaning in the business that you're in, because it seems to me, I see the passion. And if you're passionate about something, obviously you need a certain set of skills to do it, which you've always had. You've always had the personality. You've always elaborated on sports at this elite level that everybody, I remember DC and I used to kind of joke around about you, but like you've always had that way about you. So for you, I mean, listen, you have the passion, you have the work ethic, and a lot of what we did on a day-to-day grind in professional baseball helps with the transition to the real world. It really does. I truly feel as though if you can handle the rigors of the minor leagues and the day-to-day failure, when you transition to the real world, you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine.
Yeah, it's just scary when you stop something that you do for a while and you
Yeah.
have to restart, but that's the next chapter of it. So I guess because we'll kind of wrap it up here. Two things. First one being, to talk about Chipotle. Do you remember what your order would be?
Okay, so it's funny you say that. I was actually trying to figure out what you ordered, but I'll tell
Oh,
you.
okay.
I'll tell you who did remember.
Who?
The guy making our orders in Port St. Lucie, because we
Oh,
used
and
to walk in there.
I used to rock in
we
there at
used to,
10:02. Like, oh yeah, come on
Ryan,
in.
we wouldn't say a word, and all we would do was walk down to the register, and he'd have two bowls sitting there for us with two fountain drinks. And but I do know my order. You ready for it? And it's
Yeah.
changed because it used to be double meat, chicken, and
Yep.
steak. Now it's
Yeah,
double
that's right.
chicken, extra brown rice, depending on whether or not I'm indulging in carbohydrates or not.
Mhm.
I'm weird. I do mild and hot salsa. Sour cream, corn, cheese, guac is non-negotiable, right? I'm pretty sure, and I'm going to go first and tell me if I nail this for you. It was white rice,
Yep.
sure, and every time you were always bulking up or at least trying, right? So it was extra white rice.
Yep.
Uh, double steak.
It's double chicken.
Was it double chicken?
Yeah, for the
Interesting.
most part.
That was my debate. Was it double chicken? Was it double steak?
I mean, I've had both, but it was more double chicken than steak
I don't know
most
that you
times.
were a salsa guy.
I would just do mild, like, so just the
Black
tomatoes,
beans?
black beans, and now recently I've gone pinto. Gone
Interesting.
pinto recently.
Why the change of
But
heart?
you are right. So far, double meat, extra rice,
Extra white.
black beans was the order.
It was. Guac for sure. You
Yes.
were big chips on the side guy.
Yep.
Huge.
Mhm.
And I used to not be, but I think you swayed my thinking on that. Because now what I do, it's fascinating. I don't know if you do this, but obviously mix up the bowl, right?
Oh, have to.
Pretty standard practice.
Yeah.
But then utilizing the chips and then like almost like a nacho at that point.
Yep.
Fantastic. And then you do little Chipotle hack tortilla on the side.
Yep.
You can almost make like little
Little tacos.
tortillas,
Yeah.
tacos. That's called tacos. And man, Chipotle is good. Hey, I
So
will tell
good.
you this. I do happen to like a place that's better, in my opinion, better than Chipotle. It's called Dos Toros. Dos Toros. They're in
Where can I
cities for the
find
most
this? This could be the food
Chicago.
of the week for me to try.
Oh, dude, Dos Toros is fantastic. I would check to see if there's one in Baltimore. There could be. It's
Well,
fantastic.
I'm more towards DC now. If it's in the vicinity, I'll drive.
Hey, by the way, like I told you, Italian restaurant in Washington, D.C., Filomena's, really good.
Oh.
Very good. Lobster raviolis.
All right, so two things on my homework: Dos Toros and Filomenos.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I got those. And then lastly, we can add this up. I have everyone do this, and you've already given a lot of great advice. But if there was one thing of advice or piece of advice that you either live by or that you think is very important or influential, what would that be?
Chase your passions. Definitely chase your passions. Don't follow people's perception of success. Like for me in the area I grew up in, right outside of New York City, everybody really was infatuated by finance. And I thought maybe that's the path I need to take. But deep down, I wasn't passionate about it.
Right.
Do something you're passionate about for a multitude of reasons. For one, you won't experience burnout. And two, your ceiling will be far higher, even at the entry level, intro level. If monetarily you're not necessarily where you want to be, don't worry about that. Do something you're passionate about. You'll never feel like you're working a day in your life. That'd be my piece of advice.
I love it. Hey, that's all I got for this. I mean, we could talk for hours about it. I got to go to Dos Toros. I'm going to go to Filomenos. And I think we'll have more coming on with you talking about it, because the side of baseball as the season goes on, maybe have you on more to talk about a little bit more of the ins and outs. And as things get closer to the draft, that could be great too.
Absolutely.
So, hey, Georgie, great having you as always. And that will do it for this episode. That'll do it for this week's episode of Off Script with Rip. I hope you enjoyed the interview with George Iskenderian. And again, if you can please subscribe to the podcast and leave a review, that will make this experience better for me to understand what you guys want to hear and what I need to work on. But that does it for this week. I will see you the following week for another new episode of Off Script with Rip.